Hi, Bob Kalechman here from Millennium. We have a anniversary that I think we should observe, being that this year, coming up, will be the 70th anniversary of the Marine Corps landing on the island in World War II called Tarawa. This was the bloodiest battle of the Marine Corps in the Pacific War. And it was a battle that lasted roughly 4 to 5 days. And it had a very, very high casualty count. And the entire Japanese garrison defending Tarawa was wiped out, with the exception of maybe 15 and in addition 129 laborers, Korean laborers. And this is all the captives that were taken on Tarawa. And oddly enough, later on, I was stationed in Japan on the island called not Kyushu. Kyushu is the middle of the island, but Kyushu. I was on the island of Kyushu in the city called Sasebo. And Sasebo was a city in Kyushu that was a naval city, a naval port, and the entire garrison of Tarawa, they were Marines, all from the island of Kyushu, the city of Sasebo. And oddly enough, when I was in that city, there were very, very few men of age that would have served in World War II and the Korean War. They just did not exist. And now I know, in my studies, I know the reason for it. The male population was just about wiped out by the Marine Corps from that particular city in relation to the attack on Tarawa, which was a very, very bloody attack. Now, before we go into that, the Marine Corps observed their 238th birthday on November 10th, 2013. The United States Marine Corps has proudly served the United States of America with unfailing valor and celebrated 230 years of faithful service, 238 years of faithful service. Marines have always known hardship, fatigue, and pain, but as Commandant of the Marine Corps James Amos said, let me quote him, "We have never known what it is to lose a battle." This year, in addition, we celebrate the anniversary of 70 years of Tarawa, the 45th anniversary of the city of Hue City, Vietnam, and the 10th anniversary, the March to Baghdad. So in closing, let me ask and behoove you to remember our veteran brothers who are out there and now and presently serving in Afghanistan. Just to give you a background of the numbers, the Marine Corps had 35,000 troops. The commander was known to most Marines as Howling Mad Dog Smith. The Japanese commander was Kiju Shibazaki. He was the Japanese commander. The enemy strength was 2,619 troops, 2,200 construction laborers, 1,000 Japanese, and 1,200 Korean laborers. The casualties, the Marine Corps lost 1,696 killed, the enemy, the Japanese, lost 4,690 killed. 2,101 Marines were wounded. 17 soldiers, 17 Marines, Japanese Marines, were captured. 129 Korean laborers were captured. The Marine Corps, 109 killed, 201 wounded, and the Navy casualties were quite high. The background of the battle lasted for 4 days. Started on the 20th of November, the 21st of November, the 22nd of November, the 23rd of November. And one of the reasons for the high casualties that the Marine Corps suffered was the fact that back in those days, they were reading the tide tables, but for some reason or other, they had the wrong tables, or they were reading the table wrong for Tarawa. And what had happened was that the invasion Marines, they were caught during low tide. And a lot of the landing craft, Higgins boats, they couldn't get into the shore. The half-tracks could get in, but the half-tracks were drawing all the enemy fire. So what you had was you had Marines that were stranded at low tide, and they had to wade into Tarawa, which actually was where the fighting and the casualties and everything occurred, was more or less what they call on the island of Betio, B-E-T-I-O. There's where the fierce fighting, and it was fierce from what I'm told, very fierce. And the casualties were above normal. They were very unacceptable. Now, it should be noted that there were 4 Medal of Honors awarded. 3 were awarded posthumously. In other words, they were the 3 Marines that received the medal. They were killed earning the medal. And I have their citations, and I like to read them to you. And then in addition, one of the Medal of Honor winners, later on in his Marine Corps career, went on to become the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And I served under General Commandant David Shoup. I served under him, I knew him. And he was a good man. And oddly enough, he was a Marine, and he was a good Marine, and he was a very religious, and he was a very moral general. There's one instance that brings a lot of smiles to a lot of Marines' face, is that on Okinawa, when this is after the war, when General Shoup was the commander of the Marines on Okinawa, he issued an order to all his first lieutenants that they wouldn't be allowed to stay overnight in the Okinawan cities. And he stopped that foolishness right off the bat. Every officer had to return to the base before 1 o'clock. They weren't allowed to sleep in town. And that's just to give you the medal of this man. And he was bravery. You couldn't touch him as far as bravery goes. Now, the hostilities were such that on the first day, The two minesweepers and a destroyer minesweep came to the opening in the lagoon, and they swept the mines. And the landing force and Higgin boats and half-tracks, they waited. And as soon as the mines were swept, the invasion craft entered the lagoon. They were guided by a minesweeper, and it was early in the morning, and their running lights guided the landing craft in. And there were three beaches. There were Red Beach 1, Red Beach 2 in the center, and there was Green Beach 3. And Green Beach was the corridor. So you had Red Beach 1, Red Beach 2, and Red Beach 3. And this is how they were located, right along the shore. Now, in addition to that, you had a seawall. And you hit the seawall, and of course when you hit it at low tide, fine, you had it to protect you. But as the tide came in, and you could visualize these Marines are dug in on the other side of the seawall, the seaward side, and as the water comes in, it starts to come into their holes. And as you know, if you've ever been to a beach, you see how the ocean can push in the sand. And as the tide rose, it came up, it was higher and higher and higher. And the Marines were there protecting themselves from enfilading fire or whatever. And in addition to having the water coming up, as they came up, they became exposed to enemy fire. And then it came along the line with the wounded and such, that the Marines, they had to get out from in back of that seawall. So at that time, Colonel Shoup, who was the colonel in charge of that beachhead, he issued the order: we get everybody off the beach, or you're gonna die here. And he issued the order for everybody to go over the top, and they all went over the top, and that was fierce, getting over the top there. And that happened. And then on the second day, they had the Japanese were starting to counterattack. So Colonel Shoup was the senior officer of the landing force, and he assumed command of all landed Marine Corps troops upon his arrival on the shore. And he was wounded. And after landing in the pier, Colonel Shoup took charge of the situation, cleared the pier of Japanese snipers, and there were many, and rallied the first wave. And then they started moving inland. On the second day, and you have to figure, you didn't sleep because during the night you had all the hostilities going. So on the 21st, with the Marines holding a thin line on the beach, the focus of the second day was for the force on Red Beach 2 and 3 to push inward and divide the Japanese defenders. That was the point, was to divide the island in half. And when they took one side of the island, the fiercest fighting was on the tip of the island, because all the fanatics went to the tip of the island, and when they tried to clear it, it was a very, very dastardly action. And it was, and this is how it went for the Marine landing force. And the third day, they had a similar situation. Now, you had people telling stories in the sense of reaction. Good case at point. You remember the actor Eddie Albert? He played in Green Acres and a few other hits on television, plus some good movies. Well, he was a Coast Guardsman, and he was a coxswain. In other words, he ran a landing craft. He ran a Higgins boat. And he was awarded the Bronze Star and other decorations. And what he was doing, he was going up and down the shore, and where Marines were stranded, where they escaped with just their lives, with no weapons and everything, he would go out to the ship, get weapons, M1s or whatever, and he'd come back to the Marines and issue them weapons. Or he would take as many of them as he could in his Higgins boat, and he'd take them over up to Red Beach 1, Red Beach 2, Red Beach 3, so they would have a more or less a better base than being isolated. And certainly if you were during the Battle of Tarawa, if you were isolated, you were a dead man. It was only a matter of time before they got to you. So this is the situation. And Eddie Albert, he became a hero in the sense that he was awarded the Bronze Star. But here he was a Coast Guardsman who was a coxswain of a Higgins boat, a landing craft. So, and in many cases, a lot of Coast Guardsmen ran landing crafts. Now, the L Company advanced down the eastern end of the island. Major Shaftel, he was the 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines, and Major Hayes, he was the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. In other words, the first letter I give you is the battalion, and the last letter is the regiment. Now, in the 2nd Marine Division, which was the division that invaded Tarawa, the 2nd Marine Division, you had the 2nd, the 6th, the 8th, the 10th, and supporting units. And this is how they were. And each regiment had 3 battalions. So 1-8 would be 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. 2-8 would be 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, and 3-8 would be 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. And then it breaks down, and you had then of course the famed 6th Marines are part of the 2nd Division, the 6th Marine Regiment. That's the Croix de Guerre that was awarded in World War I for Belleau Wood. When the Marines left the island, they buried their dead, and they left. And and just let me name some of the commanders that were involved in the taking of Tarawa. Chester Nimitz, Admiral Spruance, Ray Spruance. He was one of the admirals in charge of the Naval Air Wing at the Battle of Midway. General Julian C. Smith, referred to by Marines as Howling Mad Dog Smith, and Lieutenant Colonel David Choop, who later became Commandant. And this was the reason that they wanted Tarawa was located in the Gilbert Islands. And it was more or less the entrance into the Marshall Islands. And the purpose of the island was the airstrip. That's what they wanted. They wanted an airstrip on Tarawa, just so they could launch fighters and they can protect the invasion going into the Marshalls. And that was the purpose, to take the gateway of the Marshall Islands. But it was the Gilbert Islands. And originally the Gilbert Islands were, it was a German protectorate that owned those islands. And after World War I, the island, or the group of islands, they were awarded to the Japanese for their participation. I think it was in China, and that was their prize, more or less. Now, I'm going to more or less change hats, but before I do that, very briefly, let me go through the Medal of Honor winners, and 3 are posthumously, their names, and give you an idea of their heroism. Alexander Bonnyman, Jr., First Lieutenant, United States Marine Corps Reserve, 2nd Marine Division, Tarawa, born 1910, Atlanta, Georgia. Acting on his own initiative when assault troops were pinned down at the far end of Video Pier and by overwhelming fire of Japanese shore batteries, First Lieutenant Bonnyman repeatedly defied the blasting fury of the enemy bombardment to organize and lead the besieged men over the long open pier to the beach, then voluntarily obtained flamethrower and demolition organization, the Pioneer Shore Battery, into assault, demolition, directed the blowing of several hostile installations before the close of D-Day. In other words, the blowing of several hostile installations, they're pillboxes, and they were on the beach, and you couldn't get to them. But this First Lieutenant, 2nd Marines, he managed to get to them. The next posthumously award, William James Bordello, U.S. Marine Corps. As a member, he was an engineer, assault engineer, platoon, 1st Battalion, 18th Marines. That was an attached engineering outfit. Tactically attached to the 2nd Marine Division in action against the Japanese-held atoll of Tarawa and the Gilbert Islands on 20 November 1943. Born 25 December 1920, San Antonio, Texas. Landed in the assault wave with weathering enemy fire, which killed all but 4 of the men in the tractor. They were in the Amtrak, and when the Amtrak went in, at that time they had no cover, they had no top. So when the bullets would go in, they just bang around and bounce around until they hit somebody. And of everybody in that Amtrak, there were only 4 that survived, and he was one. Our next hero, posthumously awarded, was William Dean Hawkins, and he was United States Marine Corps. He's from Fort Scott, Kansas, and the First Lieutenant Hawkins steadfastly carried the fight to the enemy, destroying 3 more pillboxes. And then, of course, Lieutenant Colonel David Monroe Shoup at the time. He's the only living Medal of Honor winner. So, and later went on to become the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Now, there's something that I want to address, and it's important that I do so. And it's come to my sad attention that the Marines in particular, and the war veterans, or the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Coast Guard, and in particular Marines, that are returning from Afghanistan and have returned from Iraq and have returned from Iraq I and Iraq II, are not being cared for properly. And I know you're being told by your senators, United States senators, and your United States congresspeople that they're doing everything and more for these returning veterans, men and women. And I'm here to assure you and to ask and to invite any one of the elected officials, senators or congressmen, to debate me on Simsbury Cable or debate me anywhere. We're showing me what they're doing for our Marines and our veterans. And it's not much of anything, I assure you. Case in point, a week or two ago, a Marine Corps captain, a Marine Corps corporal by the name of Justin Eldridge from Watertown, Connecticut, blew his brains out, suffering from PTSD and brain trauma. He wasn't treated properly. Are you aware that Connecticut at one time had a state veterans hospital where we had full-time psychiatrists? No longer exists. They turned the hospital and the psychiatrists were dismissed, and we ended up without any hospital. We now have a home for 350 veterans, right? It's an old people's home is what it is. And here again, it's out there. We used to service 5,000 veterans at the Rocky Hill Hospital, Veterans Hospital. It was a state veterans hospital. And it was started with the money from the World War I veterans that came back and used their bonus march money to give the money to start the hospital out at Rocky Hill. The hospital was taken care of, was abolished, and the veterans were never replaced. They kept all the political appointees, however, but they abolished the hospital. And it's not wrong. It's wrong. And I urge you to contact your U.S. senators, your U.S. congressmen, and your local representatives and senators, and insist that that hospital be restored. And ask them to prove that they're helping these youngsters. They're not. They're totally being ignored. They're not given the service they deserve. They're not being treated for PTSD or brain trauma. Has to be done by professional people, by psychiatrists. And they haven't done a thing. And if they don't do it and they lie to you, it's time to ask them to leave, to throw them out of office. And that's as harsh as I can get, because you can't bring back this corporal, this Marine Corps corporal who killed himself, committed suicide, had with 4 children and a wife, and the government just sat idly by. He cried out for help, and they sent the SWAT team. It has to stop. Well, thank you for allowing me into your homes. And let me say this on a lighter side is thank you again. God bless.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.